Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tabletop Cyberpunk. My name is JonJonTheWise. This is the podcast about Cyberpunk 2020 and Red, the tabletop games. I hope you guys have had a wonderful week and you enjoyed the last episode because this one is a doozy, as they say. I got a very special guest with me, but before we get into that, make sure you guys join the Discord community. The link will be in the description below. Make sure you guys are subscribed to the podcast if you're watching this on YouTube, Tabletop Cyberpunk. It's on Spotify and all the other podcatchers. And make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube if you're listening to the podcast. Social media, JonJonTheWise. That's it. That's all about me. All right, today I have a very special guest with me. I have Guy Sclanders from How to Be a Great Game Master. How you doing, Guy?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on your show.
This is a big deal for me. This is one of those career highs, as they say, because I can say this honestly with my whole community listening to me. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it wasn't for you. And I told you be prepared for compliments because they're coming. So,
well, as long as you're having fun, that's the bottom line. Then that's all achieved.
That is the common denominator for everything I'm doing. I promised myself if I stopped having fun that I wouldn't be doing it anymore because it's just not worth it. If it's not
Absolutely.
The whole business, I mean, we're not going to be millionaires doing this, so you know what I mean? I don't know if you are. I don't know if you got a secret. If you could,
I wish. No.
Damn it! Not even Guy. So yeah, I mean, just the way that your whole channel is set up. For those of you that are unfamiliar, Guy has a YouTube channel, How to Be a Great Game Master, among other things that he does. But that is the key way that I was introduced to you. I found your videos on YouTube to help me be a game master, create my campaigns, and the lessons that you've taught your viewers have carried on to all kinds of genres. And I've been doing all kinds of cyberpunk campaigns and stuff like that using your same principles. I don't know if you were aware that you're that generalized in information.
Well, we actually tried to be as general as possible. I mean, it's difficult because it's so much easier to refer to Dungeons and Dragons because that's sort of common ground for most role players. So we do go there, and we certainly know that fantasy has a lot more support in terms of viewers and people doing stuff. So that's where the most requests come from. But personally, I'm much more of a sci-fi fan myself.
Oh, interesting.
So we try and keep the information that we give out as generic as possible. I mean, it's storytelling. And as we say, that hasn't changed in 12,000 years worth of storytelling or more, depending on how long you want to go back in history. But yeah, so there we go.
Well, let me ask you, because you obviously inspired me to do my channel, and but I wonder what inspired you to sit behind the camera. And I know it's hard to look at your original videos because, I mean, even for me, I've been doing it for 2 years. It's so hard to look at those videos in the beginning. But even in the beginning, where you're obviously a little more wound up, a little more uptight, just like anybody else, and you decided, why don't I just turn on a camera, tell people what it's like to run a good game, have a good group, be a good people person is pretty much most of the lessons that you've been teaching. What inspired you to do that, and what gave you the confidence to not have imposter syndrome the entire time?
Wow. Okay. Yes. The second question is a very, very strong one.
It's something I know. It's something that I deal with, and most of the creators that I talk to deal with all the time.
Yeah. So diving into the first part of that question, I am from South Africa, and there was an annual role-playing convention that everyone used to go to, and there was a section that was competitive play, which a lot of people kind of go, well, how can you play competitively, role playing? Because it wasn't just Dungeons and Dragons. It was, you signed up and there was Warhammer 40K role playing going on. There was Call of Cthulhu. There was Dungeons and Dragons. But the scoring system that the guys had was really, really good. And it was designed to help you look and go, oh, okay, so I scored lowly on this, or I scored lowly on that. I can work on that. So for GMs, it was really, really, really useful. Oh, your NPCs are not so clear. okay, cool. Well, that's something I can work on. So I really liked that component of it. And I was just very fortunate, I guess, that for 3 years running, I won the competition as the best GM at the event. But on the 4th year, when I was busy signing up, there was a young man who was waiting in line to sign up as well. And he went, "Oh, are you competing?" And I went, "Well, sure. I mean, it's a competition and, why not?" And he went, "Okay, well, then I'm not going to sign up then because there's no ways you're going to win." And I went, "Wow, okay, that is not what my goal is, and that is not what I want other GMs to suffer or go through." So I immediately withdrew from competitive play straight away, and went, "Well, why is it that someone like me can come in and win these competitions as opposed to somebody else? What's the difference? What's the differentiator?" And I think one of the things was that my background is script writing in film and television. And I went, okay, so I understand the principles of how to tell a good story, but that's a very small component of role playing. Role playing is a much more complicated hobby than a lot of people seem to give it credit for.
Yeah.
And I went, well, let me show people how I tell a story. And so that's when I recorded it. And the recording almost caused it not to happen, which was quite interesting.
Wow.
My partner at the time, we'd set up a background and we'd kind of got in gear and stuff, and I'd borrowed cameras and things from my film buddies because I was filming it like a film thing that I would normally do as a day job. And my partner was there, and he kept saying, "Stop lecturing. Stop going into your professional voice mode. Just talk to people. Just be you."
It's hard to find your voice, especially in the beginning, and I think that's what it was, right?
Correct. It was about that, but also that relationship didn't last for very long, which is probably indicative of a whole bunch of stuff. But it was also about the case of my channel is most certainly an educational channel. You don't necessarily go to my channel to laugh or to see trends and that sort of thing. You come to the channel to be educated. So there is a certain, I don't want to say formality, because I have tried to make it as crazy and as engaging as possible, but it's just who I am.
Well, you're also taking a subject that is a game at its core, and you're taking not a serious tone with it, but you're taking it seriously, really. You're like, you're taking it. I always tell people being a game master is kind of like a scholarly pursuit. You're reading books, you're writing. I mean, if it supplement any other subject, and people would think that, oh, you're a scholar, but we're doing it with swords and dragons and stuff like
Absolutely. that. And that's what I love about the hobby, is that there is just so much out there. You look at people and you say, okay, cool, you're a game master. What are your hobbies? And it's sword fighting, or it's going to archaeological sites in the middle of nowhere. And you go, well, why? And it's like, well, because if I know how a sword works, and I can describe it better in combat, and I can do this and I can do that. So absolutely. I mean, Gary Gygax wrote a very influential book in my life called Master of the Game, which I think came out in the early 80s. And in that, this was obviously pre-internet, he had a list of books that he recommended that game masters read. And it was just a whole bunch of history books, the history of Rome, the history of architecture, medieval castles, and all that kind of stuff. So absolutely.
Yeah.
And, then getting back to your second question about the imposter syndrome, I am always still nervous before a game.
Yeah.
And I've been gaming for 20 plus years, and people have joined queues to join my game. And you kind of go, well, when you're at that point, surely you can go, well, I'm a great GM. I don't think so, because you're only as good as your last adventure. And so it should be an exciting thing that you're investing in and you're driving, and you should be trying to push yourself to do it better. And not just go, okay, well, people now say you're a great GM. Okay, cool. That's it. Yeah. So that imposter syndrome, I try and push that back by going, okay, cool. Well, my next campaign series, I want to try and make it more like a mystery series. So how do I make a really good mystery that my players can run through? Or how do I do this? Or how do I do that? So yeah, I think that's how you overcome it, is by saying it's there, but let me try and be better. Let me try and not be the imposter that I'm worried that I am. And I think people will, at the end of it, when your player's like, oh my God, that was amazing, that was so cool. Well, boom, there you go. You're not an imposter anymore.
Yeah, exactly. You get the gratification from your work, from your players. I've been so numb to, like, don't get your hopes up, don't with your players, because I've written NPCs in adventures and they're like, yeah, no, we're gonna go do this thing and that thing. So I've like killed that part of me. So when they say this is an amazing adventure, I don't know how to take it. I just say, maybe they're lying. I don't know, something like that. But you said something interesting about basically what you're saying is to be as humble as possible in this pursuit, because we both have names like how to be a great GM, and I'm JonJonTheWise. Like, yeah, great. On my Twitter profile, it says I'm not really wise. It's just a name. So I'm always trying to learn from other people. I always try to better myself. I read modules. I watch videos like yours, Seth Skorkowski, Taking 20, and all these people that help me out so much in my games. And when somebody else tells me, hey, you're a great game master, my immediate reaction is like, oh, no, I'm not that great. I still have a lot to learn. There's better than me. And maybe that's the right approach, right?
I think that, yeah, I think so. I think we have to constantly be saying, well, I'm glad you enjoyed the game. And if you had fun, then that's fantastic. That's really, really, really cool. I do think that that's the biggest challenge that as game masters we do have, is that there is a certain expectation that we are there to provide entertainment for the players.
Yeah.
And if the players are not having fun, then it's our fault. And there are a lot of reasons why it could have been our fault. But at the exact same time, we also should only be playing this game because we're having fun whilst doing it. So you've got to find that balance between saying, well, actually, you know what? I'm pretty proud of that little riddle I put together, or that adventure, or but yes, not to get to the point where you just assume you know everything and you can do everything. Because if you're playing with the same group for 20 years, then sure, it's a different kind of experience. But if you are hopefully one day going back to conventions and you're playing with different groups, or you're trying out different people, everybody's different. So your playing style is going to have to change up. And if you have this arrogance that you are just brilliant, you're not going to be very flexible, I don't think.
No.
So yeah, completely agree.
It's like all things in life, once you think you're an expert, then something comes along and makes you eat the humble pie. But I wanted to go back to you talking about your scene writing or script writing background, because I think that's really helped you a lot in being a game master. Just from my perspective, you wrote an amazing book, How to Write Epic Campaigns. Is that what it's called?
Complete Guide to Epic Campaigns.
Guide to Epic Campaigns. It's only $10 on DriveThruRPG. I recommend it to everybody that I talk to. And I'm like, look, I know that this is another cost to you, but I'm telling you, if there's one thing you can get from that book, it's the sentence. And the sentence is pretty much what I've been looking for my entire life was, is there a formula to writing a good story? I know we have the hero's journey, and that's something that everybody uses. But I mean, for games, for RPGs, what is the formula? And the sentence is that. Could you elaborate to people what the sentence is?
Yes. So, well, the sentence in as it stands is, somebody wants something badly by a specific time and is having difficulty getting it using certain tools or forces because someone is stopping them. So that's the whole sentence. And that comes from script writing. That is a sentence. I've expanded upon it to make it a little bit clearer. But that is something that script writers use as a way of testing whether the script is good. Because a script is not role playing. You kind of write it and then hopefully it's a good script, and then people will take it. So you insert into that you insert the villain or the heroes, the PCs. I usually go with the villain because then it gives you more latitude when you are then running the game to be more flexible.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, you don't know where the PCs are going to go, and you don't know what they necessarily want you to do. You don't know what they want, and so to give them a difficulty in getting that is is tricky. You don't know how to do that. But with the villain, if you say, well, the villain wants to take over the world by the solar eclipse, but he can't do that because he needs a crystal which will enhance his power. But the goons he keeps sending out to try and get the crystal keep failing because the PCs keep stopping those goons from getting those crystals. Now suddenly you have a framework. And from that framework, you can then say, okay, well, the villain wants the crystals. The PCs keep stopping him from getting the crystals. What is he going to do to overcome that? Yeah. So when your PCs then go, okay, well, we take the crystal and we eat it, because they're players, right? They're going to do crazy things.
Yeah.
What is the villain's response to that going to be? Is he going to try and find an alternative source? Is he going to try and gut one of the PCs? So he sends assassins after the PCs. It gives you as the game master so much more latitude, so that as you get more comfortable with that principle, then as you were saying earlier, you don't really want to plan too much because your players are going to go everywhere anyway. And you're going, well, that's okay. I don't have to have these mega complicated plans that are not going to then ever see the light of day. I just need to go back to my sentence and ask, well, what's my villain going to do now? Because ultimately that's always going to be the trip up. And if the PCs don't take the bait, if they don't go on the journey to stop the villain, you should just have other villains who have other things going on. I mean, it's as simple as that. And then all of your energy has only been spent on writing one sentence, as opposed to an entire campaign that now just never happens. So, yeah, that's when I was writing the book, and my whole channel has always been about, okay, here's some theory, but how do we actually put that into practice? How do we make this something that is actually usable? Because that always used to frustrate me when I was learning. I'm like, well, that's great theory, but give me something I can work with.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad to hear that the book has helped you in some way, because
immensely. Yeah, no, immensely, because basically what the sentence does is it eliminates writer's block.
Right.
What it does is, when you don't know what else to do with the story, you can go back to the sentence and remember that was your inspiration from the beginning. So another big lesson you learn from the book is, I mean, it sounds like common sense, but every story has a beginning, middle, and end. And that's 1, 2, 3. That's a structure. The 1, 2, 2, 1, the everything that you teach in the book is pretty much structuring your writing. And when you have a blueprint on how you can begin your writing and where to look for inspiration, you just let your brain flow and write, delete what you need to delete. And anytime you're confused on where this story is supposed to go, you go back to the sentence. And because of that, I mean, that's a universal writing thing. It has nothing to do with Dungeons and Dragons. I've used it for all my campaigns. All my players are like, oh, that twist was amazing. How did you do that? And it's like, the sentence. That's it. That's all I did. So, yeah, basically, thank you is what I want to say.
Right.
And make sure everybody knows that. But I also noticed about you that there's this, there's order and balance in everything that you do. You have a journal with you. You have structure. You came up with this formula. Where did that come from? Where did that kind of writing and way of being come from?
I think the initial space was coming from failing a lot. So I would write scripts and I would write stories when I was in college and trying to become a script writer and that sort of thing. And I would write them and then I'd make them as films, and I'd just watch as the stories just failed. And again, it was like, well, why? What is causing this to fall? And it was not sticking to that kind of formula. And I got to a point where I used to lecture film and television. And in Hollywood, there is a specific technique where everything is broken into 10-minute blocks. So in a 90-minute film, you've got 9 blocks. And when you look at that fits exactly into the 3-act structure. It fits exactly into the 1-2-1 method, which I talk about in my book. And once you see that, suddenly when you're watching films, you're like, well, I know exactly what's going to happen next, because we're 9 minutes and 95 seconds into a whatever. And there's a wonderful film with John Candy in it called Cool Runnings, which came out in the early 90s about a Jamaican bobsled team. It's a lot of fun. But that film is so formula. Literally, my students would sit there and they'd watch as the 10-minute clock ticked over, the next beat in that 9-beat section sort of happened. So I kind of took all of that, and I took all of my script writing knowledge and my experience, and I said, okay, when we're looking at role playing, can we use the same technique? And I realized I actually was doing that subconsciously anyway. I didn't have the formula and the templates before I sort of codified it. And I went, well, then that's brilliant. Then that we can then translate that into something that GMs can then use and go, well, okay, I know where I am in that sort of structure. So what's coming up next needs to be potentially a this or potentially a that. And as you say, it helps you with writer's block. It also helps you if you haven't necessarily had time to plan. You go, okay, well, we need an introduction to the villain. So how am I going to introduce the villain? Let's do it in the most flashy way possible. We're going to Michael Bay this and start with an explosion.
Yeah.
Or we're gonna do something weird and quirky, or we're gonna do something mysterious. And then you're just following the steps, sort of moving forward. So they're not meant to be restrictions. They're meant to be supports so that you're free to go, okay, cool. Well, we're going to throw in an ogre, or we're going to throw in if we're talking sort of cyberpunk, we're going to throw in some kind of bounty hunter who has some kind of device which will kill you via a neural link. Right. Okay. So the bounty hunter is our villain, right? How do we introduce him to the story and the players? Maybe the players find someone who has been killed in this way. Okay, cool. So we need a crime scene. There we go. First section of the adventure is done. Now, how did he kill him? Well, we know he uses this neural link. So there's a burn mark on the side of the head. And that's the only clue that they get. And then they can go off and do whatever it is that they're going to do. And you're then going, okay, next step is to introduce them to the plot. Why does this cyber assassin want to kill them? Next step. So you constantly just following it, going, well, I'm free to go wherever I want because I'm not constrained anymore by trying to panically figure out what's next.
Yeah, exactly. I love that idea about it too, that you pretty much have a structure. So when you get to certain parts of the story, you can be as creative as you want to because you don't have to be afraid that you're messing up the plot or anything like that. The sentence is the plot. Everything else is just decoration around the plot.
Correct. Yeah.
All right.
And the players are making the story. That's the key thing.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not making the story as the GM. As the GM, you have your plot and you have your trigger. And when that trigger happens, then the players are going to be doing stuff which you can't anticipate.
Yeah, you had a great something. You have a lot of these like profound quotes. Remember, compliments coming. So you had one of these profound quotes that you said that it's like, yes, exactly. In your latest video, you said, as a game master, this is your event, not your story. It's the player's story. You're just putting on a show.
Yeah.
And that resonates with me so much. That's exactly how I try to look at all my stories. It's like, yeah, I wrote this and everything, but you're the ones driving the plot.
That's it.
So let's do a little bit of shifting gears here because we're going to be talking I kind of want to focus a little bit on Cyberpunk Red. Have you played Cyberpunk at all, 2020, or are you familiar with the games?
I haven't played the games, but I have played a lot of Cyberpunk-based RPGs and that sort of thing. And I've worked on a system setting for it's coming out still. There were some problems with the publishing for a TTRPG called Carbon 2145.
85, yeah.
85.
I backed it on Kickstarter. It's great. I mean, it has its issues, but I think that overall it's a fun game.
Absolutely. And I was privileged enough to get hired to write the source book for Tokyo.
Oh, very nice.
Because I was living in Tokyo at the time. And so, the guys got a hold of me and they said, okay, well, can you write the source book for Tokyo? Here's some stuff. And yeah, that was a really fun experience because a lot of the stuff that's in the Tokyo source book, if anyone has ever visited Tokyo, will realize that that is not cyberpunk. That's just what Tokyo is like now,
Mm.
because that's such a futuristic city. It really is. It really is intense. But
Yes,
anyway, sorry.
no, that's great. That's one of my bucket list places to go to Japan. It looks amazing over there. I mean, you see like videos of like, oh, that's how they valet cars. It's like this amazing machine that takes your car, and they're living in the future, man.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, that was the funny thing, was that I was writing for this time period, and they said, no, it's too sci-fi. You got to tone it down.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, well, I'll make it Japan 2019, because that's kind of what it ends up being. But that's the other thing about Japan, is that you have Tokyo, and places like Kyoto and other major cities where it is the future.
Yeah.
And then you walk or you take a train to the edge of that city, and suddenly you're stepping 400 years into the past.
Oh, wow.
Into wooden homes and just Japan of antiquity, which is mind-blowing. Absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah, I had that kind of juxtaposition in one of my games too, where they live in this cyber dark future where it's kind of post-apocalyptic in some places, and other places it's a futuristic city, and then other places it's beautiful suburban houses with cul-de-sacs, kids playing outside, and people are just walking around looking like, is this real? Is this really happening? And the only reason they can do that is because they're in a corporate zone.
Right.
So I wanted to talk about realism versus suspension of disbelief, because Cyberpunk Red. So just to give you a little bit of history, Cyberpunk 2020 came out about 30 years ago, and the community has still been playing it to this day. But after 30 years, you can imagine that there's been a lot of homebrew, a lot of changes, things, quality of life stuff, things that developers have learned over the years. And finally, we just got Cyberpunk Red. It just released a few weeks ago. And they have modernized the game. And with modernizing the game, they had to take away a little bit of the simulation of realism that 2020 had. I mean, 2020 had all kinds of stuff, like how much damage each kind of bullet does, a .22 LR, a 9mm, a 9mm super. I mean, it goes on and on through the splat books. So because of that, it attracted a lot of people that are into that realism simulator, and they even homebrewed their own realistic stuff into the game. And Cyberpunk Red took the approach of, we need to make a balanced game system that works. And all this other stuff is fun. We can add it later on maybe, but we got to have a good base. And there's a lot of suspension of disbelief, like, oh wait, why can't I do this thing that I was able to do in this 30-year-old game? Why can't I do it in Red? And the answer is because it's not balanced. We got to do it this certain way. So how do you feel about balance versus realism simulators and stuff like that?
It's a very tricky one. I think to give you my honest answer, which is not a useful answer, which is why I don't like it very much, but it is what it is. I think that it's about reading your group, to be honest with you. I've role played with people who love their simulationists, who love their simulation, and to make it not a balanced game. It doesn't have to be balanced, but it just needs to be a case of, okay, well, yes, .22 will do this much damage versus a 9mm versus a 303, or, going into bigger calibers. This vehicle will travel at this speed, and, so you get those kind of folks who really enjoy playing with the system itself. So it's a meta game that they are playing as well as role playing. So there's a role playing element, but it's the numbers that they're really keen about. And then you get others where it's like, no, numbers are not necessarily important. It is all about the story. And you're absolutely right. There has been a major shift towards simplification and the reduction of information that we're getting in role playing games. Personally, I find that very, very sad. Because I grew up on books where I was like, I have no idea what the difference is between a mangonel, an onager, and let's say catapult is.
Yeah.
So you go and research it, and you're like, oh my goodness, they're all from the Romans, who were just these really devious weapon designers, and that's what this is, and that's what this is, and that was it. Whereas now, if it all gets sort of washed down to, well, it's a siege weapon and it does X damage, you're like, well, it's losing something, I think. So, but again, if your players don't care, if they're just about having a good time and social interaction, then yeah, it doesn't matter. So when you then look at something like Cyberpunk and you go, well, the one written 30 years ago was written at the height, I would say, in my limited experience, of the sci-fi computer terror period.
Yeah.
Where you've got things like the fear of the machine taking over. We're moving away from aliens in terms of sci-fi literature. Now it's more towards robots and AI and the computerized world and all of those kind of wonderful things that we're opening up in that sort of time period. Whereas today, it's like, well, we kind of almost already there. I mean, Elon Musk is pushing us as fast as he possibly can into a cyberpunk future anyway.
Yeah.
So there is always going to be that challenge of going, well, yeah, the edge, that slightly fantastic notion, which we had 30 years ago, it's not really there anymore. When you say, oh, the communicator is embedded in the side of your skull, 30 years ago, that was amazing. Now we're like, well, yes, can I have that, please? Because then I don't have to worry about my phone. If I can just swipe in front of me and my apps are there, I'm totally down with that.
Yeah. It's like voluntarily taking your eyeball out to get in a cyber eye. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we are, to a large degree, past the fear of that. And when you think about the crux of storytelling, it's oftentimes about exploring the unknown, exploring the fear. And science fiction in particular, I think Arthur C. Clarke was the one who said, no, it wasn't Arthur C. Clarke, it was Ray Bradbury, I think, who said that it is the last playground of the philosopher. Because we can go, well, what if there is an alien race that only has currency as their primary motivator? Which, Gene Roddenberry then did his Ferengi. So when you look at Cyberpunk, it's not really sci-fi, but we kind of having to make it sci-fi just so that it still remains something that is unknown, something that we can explore in. One of my favorite role-playing systems of all time was D20 Modern, which came out, I don't want to say now, but it's probably like 15 years ago. I mean, it was just after 3.5 had released, and they were sort of expanding. And you go, well, that D20 Modern is no longer D20 Modern. It's sort of D20, slightly old, out of date type of D20. So yeah, I think whatever they're doing in terms of the system, it is a challenge. And the homebrew factor is very, very strong.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter really what system I'm playing. I'm always going to be homebrewing anyway, whether it's the monster statistics or certain attributes, or I love tinkering with systems to make it fun.
Yeah.
And there's this other notion of saying, well, in Cyberpunk, I suppose it's not too much of an issue, but in sci-fi games and fantasy games, it's like going, no, actually, all the different species now have the same statistics, but you can now custom design it based on your ancestry or on your legacy or any word to avoid the race word, which I think I understand politically why, but they are just different races. And anyway, so that idea of taking that out, you're like, well, what are you left with? You're left with this very neutral thing.
You're also telling people they can't celebrate each other's differences. It's like we need to ignore these differences that we have. Right. When it's like, why can't it be a positive thing where it's like, you are who you are, I am who I am, and we both love that about each other?
Sure, absolutely. That's a whole different kettle of fish.
Of course. Hey, you went there first.
Yeah, that's true. Guilty.
Yeah, no, don't worry. But I think the thing about Cyberpunk is just innately, it's so wrapped up with truth, and it's so similar to our world. And I've noticed that when I play with people that have never played any tabletop RPGs and their first one is Cyberpunk, they know what to do, because I go, you walk into a nightclub and you see the drug dealer mob boss sitting in his bottle section or bottle table, whatever it's called, and you see him and he's got his lackeys with him. You know, as a person that you might have walked into a bar, you might have walked into a nightclub yourself, you know the ambiance, you know the atmosphere and everything. So because of that, I feel like people get really engulfed in the realism of the story. And unlike the fantastical nature of D&D and stuff like that, even though Cyberpunk is technically science fiction, it feels like science fact.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's very liberating. You're absolutely right. Because if you added to that scene and you said that he's sitting at his table and there's a holographic dancer doing some dance in front of him, I don't know of many people who wouldn't be able to visualize that.
Exactly.
Certainly in the role-playing community anyway.
Yeah.
My mother would probably have difficulty with that, but that's okay. She's definitely not cyber or punk in either shape or form.
Give her a chance.
Yeah. The challenge, though, that you then have is because it's so close to real life, you then have players going, well, if I fire a gun in this nightclub, normal consequences would be whoever's in there will either fire back, but then they will run. However, there should also be a gigantic amount of police who will suddenly arrive.
Yep.
And an entire judicial system, which is just ready and waiting to prosecute people for discharging firearms in a public space.
Yeah.
So you get to a point where you're suddenly going, well, my players can't do what they normally do in fantasy, which is, oh, well, we'll just kill the thing and then maybe there's some town guard, but we don't know what the reaction times are like for town guard or for the sheriff or for the lord. In Cyberpunk or in more modern settings, it's like, well, the police will be there in about 5 minutes. So you're on the clock. And all those security cameras have got beautiful scans of your faces. There is no anonymity within this space unless you take great measures to do that.
Yeah.
So there can be that restriction and you're going, okay, so now I have to think slightly different because Hollywood ignores it completely.
Yeah.
Hollywood, there's shoot-ups, and then you'll hear the cops way off in the distance, but somehow those cops never follow the leads. They never follow the eyewitnesses who were running away in terror, and the players don't have that kind of consequence.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
so there is a bit of a balance that you've got to find.
Yeah, and even in Cyberpunk, the variables are so vast. I mean, the nightclub that you shot up, the cops are mad. The mob boss that owns the nightclub is mad. The booster gang that usually hangs out in this nightclub is mad. So these are all things the players think about before they pull out their pistol. In a game that is very lethal, too, by the way. It's a very lethal game, especially 2020. I mean, you can die on the first round of combat and rip up your character sheet right away. That was one of the biggest sticking points that they tried to change in Red, and some people are upset about it, but it's like, hey, we were homebrewing, protecting yourself a little bit for years, all right? So, but yeah, there's that. Let's shift a little bit of gears over here. I got a few more questions. How long have we been? Oh, we've been doing 39 minutes. All right, cool. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Let's do, I wanted to ask you about weaving multiple campaigns together under one overarching campaign. So this is kind of a selfish question because I'm going to be doing this. So I got like a direct line with one of my teachers. So my idea is I want to have like a main hub of a town or something, whatever you want to call it, and I can play with one group and it takes place in this town. I can play with another group, it takes place in this town, but I still want them all to feel a connection to the story, to the plot. So how can you go about, I know this is a super broad question, but how can you go about connecting multiple people to one sentence or overarching campaign?
Sure. So the quick and dirty answer is that if you are planning on having these two groups ever meet, decide on how you want that meeting to be. Do you want it to be collaborative or do you want it to be
hostile,
antagonistic? What is that going to be? If it is antagonistic, then there's a very easy way that the two of them can be connected. The two different groups can be connected to your sentence. The one group is working for the villain, even though they don't necessarily know it, and the other group is working against the villain. So that puts them in the same kind of space. And what that does is it means that every time you're writing an adventure, you've actually written two adventures. Because when you're going, okay, there's a train gets hijacked and the PC is going to go and try and save the train and save the people on the train. The other group are trying to make sure that there is a very important dignitary on the train who has to be taken out, so they have to hijack the train to be able to do that in. Now, you don't necessarily play it at the same time. That would just be logistically a nightmare. But you're starting to see, okay, cool. Well, one group does a mission, the other group then comes in the aftermath, or vice versa. If they're needing to work together, then one of the other ways to do it is to have them working for two different agencies. So the idea would be the one group is working for the billionaire who funds everything and gives them a secret lair, and he is kind of working with the security department of the city, who the other group of players work with. So there's still a semi-rivalry that would happen, and that allows you to then sort of name drop the other PCs into each other's kind of spaces. And when they do get together, it's like, oh yeah, you work for the billionaire, or you work for the agency, sort of thing. So
yeah,
that's certainly one way of doing it. Another way of doing it, and this is where it becomes a lot more of a juggle, is to have two sentences running. You've got two different groups operating, but they're both being controlled by the central figure right at the top. So what you're doing is the central figure right at the top. This is a never-present nemesis in terms of my naming conventions. Is that it's the nemesis that they will never see, but that they will hear about.
That's pretty much every bad guy in all my stories has been that the corporation, the big bad corporation.
Right. So, yes, then you have two villains doing their thing. It's two separate sentences, or at least they think they're separate sentences. But if you're crafty enough, you're going to drop clues in and names and things that as they're running through it, they're like, hang on a moment, what we're dealing with is actually, it's the small time. There's something bigger going on, and the other group, hopefully, if you're good at timing, will realize the same thing. So when you get to your giant showdown, it could be quite fun to then have both groups present at the same time. I mean, good luck to you. That would be a mega event. But imagine that kind of event where you've got these players now gathering around you on Zoom, and they're going, well, why are you here? Well, we're here to stop the dolphin kidnapper. I don't know why he's a dolphin kidnapper.
The bastard.
But we know that he's not actually a dolphin kidnapper. There's something bigger. And then they reveal that they know there's something bigger as well. And that final adventure is them working together using the clues that you've hopefully distributed throughout your entire campaign to then get to the point where they then do actually take down that big, never-present nemesis, and bring them to justice and that sort of thing. So I think your starting point, that very long answer, your starting point is, what type of relationship do you want the two groups to have, antagonistic or working together, cooperative?
Yeah, I think what I do like personally is cooperative, but with a little bit of rivalry.
Yeah,
where
absolutely.
It's like, you know, they're doing, and the whole example you brought up with departments, like working for a corporation, that's accounting, that's the shipping warehouse, and that's like kind of that idea and structure of it is like those guys take care of those jobs, these guys take care of these jobs. Sometimes they'll step on each other's toes, but at the end of the day, they're supposed to be working together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks, Guy. Yeah.
Well, if it inspires something, then that's great.
I mean, that's pretty much all your work is inspiring something.
Well, that's that for me is the reward. Is when I hear people like yourself or others going, "Oh, you really helped me solve this. My party had so much fun." Yeah. Great. That's perfect.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that that's exactly how it's going down with me.
Fantastic.
So one of two, the last two, and then we'll wrap things up. I wanted to ask you about killing your players outside of combat through like a trap or some sort of force of nature or something like that. I know that for me, anytime I kill my players, I love leaving it to the rules and the dice rolls, and it's like I have receipts. Like, hey, I didn't personally kill you. Here's my receipts. Here's my evidence. The guy that wrote this game killed you. And even Mike Pondsmith, he famously says during every interview, the first thing he says, "Hi, I'm Mike Pondsmith, and I'm the one that killed your Cyberpunk character." So I can always go like, "Hey, I didn't kill you. Mike did." But there is something to say about the danger that the players will feel that, hey, even though we're not in combat, there is the possibility that you can die. But at the same time, I'll feel like such an ass for killing my player because they stepped on a bear trap or something like that, you know?
Yeah.
So how do you navigate something like that?
It is tricky, and people know that I absolutely hate player character death, especially, and I think my players know this. In the early parts of the game, the character might very well die, from a random, as you say, it's the numbers that killed you. It wasn't me. But towards the middle and end of a campaign, if it's been going on for a year, will be damned that a random dice roll has killed off the central player, or even if they're not a central player, if they're just a player character and they suddenly die, for them to bring in a new one into that campaign is going to be so difficult, unless they're really good role players. So I will use everything in my arsenal. It's like, oh, you failed that check. Well, as you're slipping into the pit of or the vat of acid, you realize there's a low-hanging cable which you might be able to reach just before you hit the, and it's really Hollywood film time. I will give you 3 rolls, maybe 4 rolls, and then if it still doesn't happen and you fall into the vat of acid, well, then that's okay, because the acid will actually transform you into this weird mutant thing, and now you have to deal with that.
Yeah.
Depending. I had a situation in my game literally 2 or 3 weeks ago where the players accidentally, because they didn't really think about it, dropped a tower onto one of the player characters.
Oh no.
So I wasn't responsible. I had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
They blew out the supports on the left and the right hand side and then wondered why the thing fell over. And so in that situation, I went, okay, well, the character is dead. Is that an interesting event, or is it not an interesting event? And I went, well, it's a sad event. Could I do something to make this make more sense? And so it was part of this massive, in a fantasy game, invasion of an enemy army. And I'm like, well, the enemy army, I know part of my plan is they're going to convert all of the dead into undead using this supercharged spell. So they're going to fire it off right now. And we were on Zoom, so I privately texted the player whose character had died, and I said, you're going to wake up. You're going to feel fine, but you now have the undead traits. So go and look those up. And it has been amazing, because that was actually about 6 or 7 weeks ago, actually, now that I think about it. And for 6 or 7 weeks, the other player characters have been going, are you all right? You look very gray. Or, they touch it. They're like, you're really cold. You should be warmed up. And occasionally they meet these people who can see the undead, and suddenly they're screaming, undead, undead. And the party like, where? Oh, wait a minute. It just be this one character. So I really hate player character death. If there is no immediate solution, then it will happen. It just will happen. But I will do everything in my narrative power to prevent that from happening. And again, I think that also boils down to, are you more of a cinematic GM, or are you more of a simulationist GM? And yes, we were talking about all that research that was happening beforehand. The more you can research, the more you read, the more you watch and absorb stuff, the more likely you are to be able to go on that second to go, I'm going to trigger this, which will actually cause the player to have a more interesting time. But again, when you are then cheating death, because that's effectively what you're doing, the player must be consulted, and they must have agency to say, no, actually, you know what? The character died, and they died in a funny way, so I'm going to go with that, and let me bring in a new character, and then you work through that. So, but yes, sometimes you just can't avoid it, and then it happens. So.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way about player death, but I also understand how important it is to have it in the game, that fear of something that can happen to your character, not having plot armor. But it's very tough for me to kill my players, especially in Cyberpunk. They have something called the life path system, and you basically map out your entire life, your enemies, your allies, your family, and you can put names and faces and organizations to them. And I use those people as part of my sentence, as part of my plot. I weave them into it just so the players feel like this is personal. So
Absolutely.
I don't have to convince them to go into that nightclub. They just saw their enemy walk into that nightclub, the one that killed their wife or whatever. So
Yes.
they walk right into the place. But whenever one of those players dies, all that stuff goes out the window and is gone, and my whole plot changes, and now I'm left trying to figure out, did I mess up? Was it my fault? The player feels bad. We all feel bad when someone dies. It's like 2 days of a bad taste in your mouth. So, and like, go ahead.
One trick you might be able to use, because I had to do this. I was doing a live read through of a Choose Your Own Adventure series, and we'd been going for weeks with this one character, and then due to unfortunate dice rolls, the character died. And everyone was like, "Oh man, we'd got so far, we'd done so much, we'd been so involved." And I went, "Okay, well, I'm going to start again, but now I'm going to be playing the brother of that character who died." So in your case, you could potentially go to the players and say, "Look, well, you died, but you've got this whole family thing going on, and aren't you lucky you didn't go with the 'I'm an orphan and all my family are dead' backstory?" Because now you can come in as the brother or as the sister or the mother or the uncle, someone who has a slight investment already. So you're kind of getting that immediate buy-in. That is definitely, I think, something that you could use, especially in something like Cyberpunk, where it's mainly humans or maybe slightly meta-humans if you sort of go too far. But anyway.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, other than, I think Shadowrun is probably one of the only major Cyberpunk games that has like magical stuff.
Yeah.
Most other ones are strictly human beings walking around and stuff like that. All right. So last question, and then we'll wrap things up. I want to talk to you about railroading. And I think I already know your answer to this, but I'd love to talk about it. Does it get a bad reputation, railroading? Is it a vital tool that actually benefits the players? And do you ever feel like when you're telling your story that you're taking away your players' agency? How do you feel about railroading?
Yes, it is a very difficult subject. And I think, firstly, railroading in general, if it's just used because the GM doesn't want to go anywhere else, is very, very bad.
Yeah.
If you want to do a railroad campaign, go write a novel, because then you won't have anyone fighting you or trying to deviate from tracks. However, at the same time, as a GM, regardless of what system you're playing, you will need to have certain amounts of railroad in your game. But I think it's about learning the balance, where when you start your campaign, I have done it many times where you go, okay, well, you're in your apartment, you're over there, you're doing your thing. And then nothing happens because no one is drawn to a central point of crisis. There's no reason for them to get together, and they get together, and then there's no reason for them to stay together.
Yeah.
So you have to inject certain moments, whether it's the very start of the campaign and they're all on the same airline that's about to crash into a mountain, that's okay, but that still won't glue them together. So you then have to railroad that their characters are the ones that are selected for this to go and find help. Again, just sort of forcing them together and that sort of thing. So you do need to use railroad techniques. And this is where I kind of go, well, I wish that it wasn't called railroading.
Yeah.
To me, it's just called event setup. You're setting up the players to go and do their story. And lots of people will push back and say, no, that's not the GM's job. You shouldn't force them to work together if they don't want to work together. Well, sure. But then I also firmly believe that the players should also be playing a meta game railroad in their own heads, where they're going, okay, cool. So the GM has given us this situation. We don't know each other from a bar of soap, but because we are all sitting here to play a game where we're supposed to be working as a team, I'm going to have my character do something to bring that together and say, hey, you and you and you, I need you to help me move the body or whatever. So it's a really complicated space to be playing in terms of, is railroad good or is it bad? And so, yes, my ultimate answer is it's both. Too much is bad. Too little is bad. Both GM and players have to use it as a tool to really maximize. And that's often I find when I'm playing with people who are very individualistic, who don't realize that they need to work as a team, that the party often feels very artificial. Yeah. And the rewards are not so great because they're not working as a team, they're working as individuals. So yeah, it's needed from both sides, and I don't think enough people realize that.
Yeah, especially I would say in the cyberpunk setting, a very important thing that you said about players working together. The cyberpunk setting in general, it breeds the loner badass that talks to nobody, stands in the corner, brooding, drinking a scotch neat. I mean, that archetype is what everybody wants to play. But the problem with that is if you got 5 people that are all that, why are they conversing with each other? Why are they working together? That's completely against everything they do. So I found that if players don't know each other, the best thing I can do is tell them that their characters know each other. And their characters trust each other. You're not best friends, you're coworkers. You know that you'll be able to get the rewards that you need to, and this guy's going to be able to watch your back. But you're not going to invite him to Thanksgiving or anything like that, or Christmas or stuff like that. And that might seem like a railroad, but really all that does is it eliminates all that awkwardness of, hey, my dad can beat up your dad kind of energy that goes around. You know what I mean?
Couldn't agree with you more. And in that book, A Complete Guide to Epic Campaigns, there is actually a section there where it's a random table for players to roll on to determine the relationships that they have with each other. And as you say, it's railroading, but those relationships are from coworker to old military buddies, all the way through to brother and sister or husband and wife. And I broke them up into different categories in terms of pushing the players. So if you're a player and you're kind of playing with new people, maybe you don't want to be lovers because that might be something awkward to try and role play.
Yeah.
So you don't roll from column C, you roll from column A, which is, we're co-workers, or we live in the same apartment building, or there is some familiarity. But it as you say, it's about having a common goal, a common start, and then working, from that. So I really agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I found that if you tell people, hey, pretend that you're friends, by the time you guys are done playing, you somehow end up becoming friends.
Right.
Because you guys do it's like the whole thing of like, hey, smile more, you'll feel better. It's like that same kind of mentality. You know what I mean? Yeah. All right. Well, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I don't want to take any more of your time, Guy. Before we wrap things up, I want to make sure that you plug everything that you need to plug, any of your recent projects. I'll say 2 off the bat. I know we talked about in great length the complete guide to writing epic campaigns, #1 on DriveThruRPG. Get that. There's also an amazing book that you wrote about nautical campaigns. That's if you guys are into battleships and guns and cannons and pirates and yeehaw, then go for that as well. Is it more based on a D&D setting, or is it a generic kind of?
Well, it's not D&D setting, but it is designed to work with Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Very good. Anything else? Any other projects that you're working on and stuff?
Well, we obviously have the weekly videos coming out, which are advice on a broad range of topics. And if you want to find out any more information on that, head on over to www.greatgamemaster.com. And that's where everything is. We've got another book coming out in the near future. There's another Kickstarter coming out. And yes, we do a lot of things with our community as well. We mainly, though, unfortunately it is fantasy.
Mm-hmm. Not unfortunate.
Well, that's well, I say it's unfortunate because, like I said, I love sci-fi and I love cyberpunk and yes, that idea of being able to run a game in that setting is really, really exciting. But yeah, around my own home table, I can do it, but as an influencer, it's like, well, if I do some sort of sci-fi thing, I get a third of the views that I get if I do a fantasy thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, this is my hobby. This is what I love doing. But now corporate is constraining me. Well, who the hell's corporate? it's me as well, because it's my own channel, right? So anyway, but yes. So greatgamemaster.com is where they can find all of that information. And that's probably the most active. Otherwise, they can join our Discord channel as well, which is discord.gg/greatgm.
Yep, and they can find all that on your website, right? Greatgamemaster.com.
Greatgamemaster.com's got everything on there. Yeah.
Perfect. Guy, thank you so much. I just want to also tell you there's an open invitation to play on any of my Cyberpunk games. You don't have to know anything. You can just come and play, be a guest anytime you want. Anytime you want to collaborate with something as well, let me know. It's been an immense honor to be able to talk to you, and I really appreciate you coming onto the podcast.
Well, it's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to do some outro music, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Stay tuned, because I got a doozy of a guest on the next one. Oh my god. All right, see you guys. Bye.